The main story. On the 1st of October 1961, the British Highway Constructing Company, called the Samaritans, agreed with Her Majesty the Queen to sign a contract with African leaders to explore the economic, mobility, safety, and environmental issues relating to roads and their users, which later failed and attracted conflicts. According to the saga, 6 months after the contract had been established, Her Majesty the Queen and the British Highway Constructing Company, the Samaritans, decided to move in their entire road construction equipment to a town called Ebiagwa in the upper Banyang region of southern Cameroons. After spending time with the African leaders in Ebiagwa, where the constructing equipments were kept, Her Majesty the Queen and the British Highway Constructing Company, the Samaritans, decided to return to the United Kingdom. A few weeks after their departure to the United Kingdom, an intruder came onto the scene and took advantage of their ignorance and lack of confidence of the African leaders, and convinced them through dialogue to bring out the contract of agreement that was signed between them and Her Majesty the Queen, which they did without questioning. The intruder took note that the African leaders lacked adequate knowledge of the importance of the initial contract of agreement, which contains vital information relating to the project. Hence, he was able to convince them to terminate the contract without the approval of Her Majesty the Queen. The intruder believed that the African leaders already had the equipment, the plan, and the knowledge needed on how to operate effectively on their own without the cooperation of Her Majesty the Queen. A few days later, Her Majesty the Queen arrived in Ebiagwa from the United Kingdom and found out that the African leaders had already terminated the contract of agreement which was between them without prior notice. However, Her Majesty the Queen lamented and questioned the African leaders. "Why have you done this to yourselves? My intentions were to build your economy, improve your security and your environment in order to help you mobilize freely in Ebiagwa without fear." The African leaders replied, saying, "An intruder influenced us to terminate the contract of agreement as he believed we had everything needed for our comfort." After listening to their excuses, Her Majesty the Queen moaned because this was gross misconduct and hence suspended the project at Ebiagwa till further notice. However, she promised on her return to the United Kingdom that she was going to send her son, a prince who is also a general, to Ebiagwa in order to make sure that the intruder was arrested and punished, thereby giving the African leaders future hope. When Her Majesty the Queen returned to the United Kingdom, she quickly assigned her son, the prince, a general, to go to Ebiagwa and make sure the intruder was arrested and punished appropriately. As a result of the incident that happened between Her Majesty the Queen, the British Highway Constructing Company, called the Samaritans, and the African leaders, the actual mission to explore the economic, mobility, safety, and environmental issues relating to roads and their users to Ebiagwa was suspended. While the African leaders were waiting for the Queen's promise, a lot of evil, corruption, and wickedness was going on. And then suddenly, the long-awaited prince, a general, arrived. Sadly, by the time the prince, a general, arrived in Ebiagwa, most of the officials of the African leaders who signed, understood, and witnessed the contract of agreement were all dead, leaving behind children and young adults who had little or no idea of the content of the agreement and why it was established by their ancestors. On the arrival of the prince, who was also a general, he began recruiting a few young African natives in order to educate them on how to enjoy life to its fullness and emphasize that they must, 1. A. Love, embrace, and care for one another. 2. B. They must read, understand, and adhere to the rules and regulations of the initial agreement between Her Majesty and their ancestors to activate the blessings. Although the prince, a general, later met with the intruder, he physically did nothing against him as expected. This alone left many in doubt if he was the expected one, the prince, a general, as promised by Her Majesty the Queen. Those who saw the prince, a general, and the intruder together confirmed that nothing that happened between the two of them could be accepted as a form of punishment as previously intended by Her Majesty the Queen. Instead, they admitted that the intruder attempted to distract the prince, a general, from educating those he had recruited. However, the prince, a general, wisely told the intruder that he could not allow anyone to distract him because he understood his purpose and mission to Ibiagwa. Although the actual assignment from Her Majesty the Queen was that the prince, a general, must get the intruder arrested and punished, this was not the case. Instead, he began training the natives who decided to accept his invitation to learn from him. In conclusion, before the return of the prince, a general, to the United Kingdom, he urged the natives he trained to continue to love one another, do good, and show kindness to others. After the return of the prince, a general, to the United Kingdom, those who sat and ate with him, the natives, began to fight the intruder, contrary to the teaching they received from the prince, a general. At the same time, they expected awards from Her Majesty the Queen for attacking the intruder, who also had access to report them to Her Majesty the Queen, or even kill them where possible. As time passed by, the natives of the land experienced difficulties in the affairs of life, prompting them to be at war with themselves and the intruder, and they finally concluded that they must request for the return of the prince, a general, almost immediately to judge everyone, including themselves and the intruder, which is now the only hope left for them. End of story. Question: do you believe or not that the above story is a summary of the Bible? Provide your evidence in not more than 500 words. Note: be aware that you are to provide evidence upon which you will have the chance to be selected and invited to the United Kingdom to defend your submission before the panel of judges. Also, bear in mind that the Global Bible Competition is for everyone, regardless of your age, sex, religion, or nationality. As long as you are able to read and prove with research evidence that the story is or not the summary of the Bible, you will be invited to the United Kingdom to defend your evidence and win one of our great prizes. First, £10,000. Second, £8,000. Third, £6,000. Fourth, £4,000. Fifth, £2,000. And sixth prize, gifts. Successful applicants will be contacted electronically regarding logistical arrangements, tickets, accommodation, and feeding. This is a prize-winning debate. Get ready to show off your debating skills. Date: 25th to 27th November 2021. The main